but we had to, you see, most people, astrology has such a terrible PR problem that to a group of non-astrologers, I mean, there are probably people here knowing this kind of group. How many people like have some familiarity with astrology beyond just knowing this? Oh my God. All right. Well, even still, there's very few astrologers, none actually, that I know of, and I know the astrologers on the planet these days, that would give you that little perspective that I gave you. That's mine. It's a kind of, you know, science, spirituality interface, a different way of framing astrology. But what I really want to talk about, not to take anything away from anything that we've heard about the Mayan calendar, about the winter solstice alignment with the center of the galaxy, which, as a point of clarification, does not happen on the winter solstice of 2012. You see, the precession of the equinox occurs at 1 degree every 72 years, which means that it's 1/72nd of a degree every year, which means that our instrumentation cannot tell whether the alignment of that winter solstice was in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, because the universe is sloppy. My man Niels Bohr once said, "Never talk with more clarity than you have." Slide. All right, so what I really want to talk about is how this upcoming phase that we've entered, we're in it now. 2012 is not in 2012. 2012 is today. It's last month, it's this week, it's next month, it's next year, and it's for the next several years. What we're putting on 2012 has already begun to unfold. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this buzz. There was no buzz like this 5 years ago. We were in an in-between phase. So it's my contention that 2012, or now through 2015 or so, will be a lot like the 60s, but also a lot different. Slide. The Rolling Stones in 1968 released Street Fighting Man, and I was going to play it, but it's okay. Let's go on. But I do want to touch on a few of the lyrics here. Slide. Everywhere I hear the sound of marching, charging feet, boy, 'cause summer's here and time is ripe for fighting in the street, boy. But what can a poor boy do except sing in a rock and roll band? 'Cause in sleepy London town, there's just no place for a street fighting man. No. Slide, please. I'm not going to go through all of this. Slide. No, did we do it? No. Oh, go back one. I'm sorry. Yeah, the time is right for a palace revolution, but where I live, the game is to play compromise solution. Slide. I said my name is disturbance. I'll shout and scream. I'll kill the king. I'll rail at all his servants. Slide. Something happened in the 60s, and we astrologers who look at planetary cycles know that the 1960s was an artifact, culturally, of an alignment of Uranus and Pluto, which happens about every 130 some odd years. But what I'd like to impress upon you today is, as planetary cycles affect the affairs of individuals, so too do they inform cultural affairs. The rise and fall of civilizations and the evolution of ideas and technology. Slide. How many people are familiar with this book? Good. It's an important book. Maybe one of the most important books you'll ever read. It's by Richard Tarnas, who's the co-director of CIIS here in San Francisco, actually, the California Institute of Integral Studies. He runs the PhD program. He co-directs it with Stan Groff. And this book is a reinterpretation of history looking at the outer planetary cycles. It's not necessarily a book for astrologers. It's a book for understanding where we are in the big scheme of things. And I recommend it very, very strongly. It's now out in paperback, so you don't have to read the 7-pound version. Rick called me when the paperback came out, and he said, hey, I'm sending you a copy of the paperback because you told me that you'd never read the book because you couldn't hold it up in bed. I have read the book. Slide. Okay, so we've heard the word synchronicity here. Synchronicity is a word that actually came into wide use through Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, the physicist, who is also known for the Pauli exclusion principle, which says that two subatomic particles cannot occupy the same place at the same time. And Wolfgang Pauli used to sit in the park at lunchtime watching people and noticing that 7 people would come by with a green sweater on. You know, that the universe seemed to group, or that the mind seemed to group phenomena in the universe. But I want to introduce you to a word that you may not know, and that word is diachronic. We have synchronicity and diachronicity. Synchronicity is when something happens at the same moment. It's apparently disconnected, but as Jung said, there's an acausal connecting principle. Diachronicity is when things happen across time. And so I just want to pose that word for you, because what's happening in 2012 to 2015 or 2008 to 2020 not only will have a synchronic effect, but also a diachronic. Slide. In 1455, I mentioned this briefly sitting on the panel yesterday, but in 1455 there was an alignment of Uranus and Pluto. For those of you who are not astroglyph enabled, you see the 2 marks down below at about, let's see, 7 o'clock. Am I doing this right? Well, no, about 4 or 5 o'clock. Those are the symbols of the planets Uranus and Pluto at 13 degrees Leo. Uranus, astrologically, planets have symbolism. Uranus is the planet of Prometheus. It's the planet that stole the fire from the gods and brought it to the humans. Uranus is the planet of invention. It's lightning striking. It releases tension and explodes brilliantly into awareness that sets the world on fire. When Pierre Teilhard de Chardin talked about the newest year, about it setting the blaze, setting the world on fire with spirit, this is a Uranian image. Every approximately 130 some odd years, Uranus lines up with Pluto. These cycles are not exact because sometimes Pluto moves very quickly when it's close to the sun, sometimes it moves much slower when it's farther away from the sun. So Uranus and Pluto lined up in 1455, the year that Gutenberg printed the Bible. Now, Gutenberg thought that there was only one book that would ever be worth printing on his printing machine. That was the Bible. It was the church's story. However, slide, in 1479, Uranus and Neptune, which is a 172-year cycle, happened. So 1455, the Gutenberg press. 1479 was the year that Botticelli painted the Primavera. It was the year that Marsilio Ficino completed the translations of Plato, or it was actually in that decade, completed the translations of Plato from Greek into Latin, and also translated the Corpus Hermetica, which was then smack hit the technology of the printing press and was dispersed all through Europe, and all of a sudden the church lost control. This is what kind of set up the movement that became the Protestant Reformation a century later. This is a very important sequence because it's not often that we have a Uranus-Pluto conjunction, 1455, followed by a Uranus-Neptune conjunction, 1479, so close together so that people who were living at that time experienced both of them. Do you understand what I'm saying? In one lifetime. When these outer planets align, people pop out of their egos, kind of like a fish in the ocean before there were mammals. The fish got together, and one crazy fish kind of took a big jump and went, and he went back down and went, holy shit, you can't even imagine what I saw up there. Oh my God. And the other fish thought that fish was crazy. But then more started doing it, until a few flopped onto land and several died in the process. But eventually what happened is we got our way, out drop our egos and we get different perspectives on what's happening. Do you understand what I'm saying? 1455 followed by 1479. I mean, in the 1470s, leading up to 1479, incidentally, in 1479, Pope Sixtus IV, I know that sounds funny, but he was Pope Sixtus IV, hired assassins to assassinate where's my brain? Medici, Lorenzo il Magnifico, Lorenzo the Great, because the Medici's primary vision holder was a man named Marsilio Ficino, who was an ordained minister, an astrologer, the translator, the single-handed translator of Plato. Plato was translated from the Greek into the Latin over the course of 20 years by one man, Marsilio Ficino. And he was, and the church didn't like the fact that the Florentines were kind of following this man who thought that the Greek Platonic and Plotinus, the Neoplatonists, were more important than the works of Jesus Christ. This was not a good scene. Anyhow, so 1479 was kind of a key point in the revolution against what was called the classical church at that time. Slide. In 1965-66, as in 1455, the year that the Gutenberg Bible was printed, we had an alignment of Uranus and Pluto. Now, for those of us who lived through the 60s, we know that line. If you remember the 60s, you weren't really there. But there are many people who were born in the 60s that instead of living through the 60s, the 60s lived through that. And it's those people, including Daniel, who were born in the 60s that are now the vision holders for what's happening in this next Pluto-Uranus alignment that's coming up, which we'll get to in just a moment. But when Pluto and Uranus align, every time there is amazing revolution, issues of equality, issues of church versus human freedom, issues of exploration. As an example, and we could talk for hours about this, but just as a quick example, in 1455, the year of the Gutenberg Bible, that was also the Pope issued an encyclical, is that what you call it? A bull, that basically was addressed to the King of Portugal, that sanctioned the conquest of non-Christian lands and the reduction of native non-Christian populations to perpetual slavery. Okay, it's a quote from the Edict of the Pope. Then, at the opening square, you see, if you think of these planetary alignments like a new moon, a conjunction, like Uranus and Pluto, is like a conjunction or an alignment of the moon at the new moon, where the sun and moon are in the same place. Halfway through, actually a quarter of the way through the cycle, they make a 90-degree angle. Incidentally, physicists tell us that the 90-degree intersection of waveforms are the most destructive and the most powerful. So what happens at the 90-degree angle is whatever occurred at the conjunction comes into a test, and it's usually very dynamic. So in 1455, the church sanctions the conquering of non-Christian lands. In 1496 to 1500, at the opening square, this was the age of exploration. We had Columbus discovering the Caribbean in 1496. We had Amerigo Vespucci in 1497. I mean, through this whole period of time, there was like this wide open, imagine what it was like to live at that time in Europe, to know that these new lands were being discovered. Okay, slide. In 1993, there was a Uranus-Neptune conjunction. Interestingly enough, 1455, Uranus-Pluto, 1479, Uranus-Neptune, within one lifetime. The only time since then that these two outer planet cycles have corresponded so close in time was 1965 and 1993. Do you get what I'm saying here? It's very powerful because I remember Ram Dass saying in 1990, I heard him talk, and he said, if you like the 60s, you're really going to like the 90s. there was something about those of us who lived through both, something happened in the late 80s, early 90s, that then settled back down in the later 90s, almost like the 70s again. Everything went quiet. Is it over? 15 minutes. So the fact that we're coming out of this period where many of us, or culture in its entirety, has had these two major jumps. Give me a slide. Now we come to the next piece of the puzzle. So up till this moment in the talk, everything has been prologue. On June 24th, 2012, Uranus and Pluto form their opening square. This is the tension that creates the remembrance of what happened at the conjunction in the mid-60s. And this is the crisis. This is the crisis of inaction, of manifestation.